Welcome to Highly Sensitive, Happily Married, the podcast that teaches you to not only have an easier marriage as a sensitive woman, but to have one that feels more amazing by the day. Where you'll hear relatable stories, love advice that works, and coaching on how to have a marriage where feeling upset and disconnected is a thing of the past, and where instead a sense of loving connection and even fun and lightness is the norm. I'm Hannah Brooks, highly sensitive person, love expert, and marriage coach, and I'm so happy to be on this journey with you. Hello, and welcome to a very special episode. Not only is it episode 25, but I am sitting next to a very special guest this evening. I'm super excited to have him here. Actually, there's two special guests. One is my cat. You might hear her rustling around in the background because I am sitting in my cozy living room after the littlest one's in bed with my husband, Will.
Hi.
He's here to have an intimate conversation with me about intimacy and marriage and our marriage specifically. And he's just been such a part of this podcast because you might not know it. It's a little known or a non-known fact that my husband is a musician, and he actually created the music for this podcast. So you hear it in the intro and the outro. That's his song, and he's gone on to create a sweet love song out of it.
It's still a work in progress, but
for me. So he's been a part of this podcast. And of course, this podcast would not even exist without him because he's part of the reason I do this work. So anyway, I'm very happy to have you here tonight, my love.
It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, I'm excited.
So hopefully we won't yawn too much. It is really warm in our house and it's late for us. We're like sleepyheads at this time of day. But we really wanted to share some things that would help you all out or be of interest. So I have some questions for my husband, and I'm interviewing him and he's going to respond appropriately to all my deep questions. Yeah. So I'm curious what it's been like for you to be married to a highly sensitive woman. What's it like to be my husband? To be a husband of a highly sensitive person. If you can even kind of isolate that out of the package of me.
Yeah, I think overall it's been amazing, for sure. I've learned a lot from you, just in terms of what. Before meeting you, I had no idea what highly sensitive was. So learning a lot about who you are and how you operate, not just as you, but in terms of the overall highly sensitive realm. I think it's helped me learn a lot about myself as well, just in terms of certain ways of interacting with the world that I wouldn't have thought of, or maybe in some sort of way of cursory learned about through Buddhism or some sort of, more sort of mindfulness type of thing. But, in terms of like a more sort of scientifically grounded way of, in terms of interpreting and understanding the nervous system and just like sort of self-care needs and just ways of sensing the world around. And so, as I said, it's been overall great being your husband, and very informative too, just in terms of realizing that, through what you've taught me about you, learn a little bit about myself as well, but then also just in terms of like how we operate together and how do I interact with you when you're in a particular sort of state of overwhelm or, how to respond to that. And so,
what do you think some of the challenges of high sensitivity is from your perspective in our relationship?
Well, I think the challenge is to remember that, you are highly sensitive, and that, for instance, if something is triggering you to a state of overwhelm or just stress and whatnot, that, it's not necessarily a personal issue with me per se, but it's just like it's your state of being that is responding to the environment. And I need to sort of, as I said, is to remind myself, oh yeah, like Hannah's having, a moment of, HSP overwhelm, and I need to respect that and honor that and like let her go, relax and take some time. And,
I like that you're talking about this because, I think that might be one of the biggest ways my high sensitivity presents itself in our lives, because we do have circumstances that lead to overwhelm. We have 3 boys, and they're loud, and they throw balls around the house, even when we ask them not to. Like, there's a lot of roughhousing and noise and chaos. And, after a full day of work, or, you all, as highly sensitive people, you listeners know, like, too much can be a little frazzling. And so sometimes that will show up in our lives together. That what you keep referring to as HSP overwhelm.
Yeah, never a dull moment, to say the least.
So what do you think, maybe this is like putting you on the spot a little bit, but what do you think some of the rewards of being with a highly sensitive woman are?
A lot of the rewards are that just due to, for instance, like your curiosity of, sort of the way other people are feeling, that, you're really sort of, care and like are curious, so a lot of times, you're very much like, hey, like, what's going on? How are you doing? And, you really take the time and the space to try to like understand me, which obviously is like beneficial for us to get as a whole in our relationship. And so that, it really helps us grow, and I think just like other things in terms of like your intentionality and focus for working together to grow, and also just making sure that, you want to make sure that I really try to understand you and where you're coming from. As far as like not just like assuming that I sort of know how you're feeling, you really make it clear, be like, this is how I am, and like I want you to know that. So I feel like that really helps.
So some of that, like, really relationship oriented. I was going to say orientated.
My
weird way with words. So that's what I'm hearing in part, is just like, I think that's a thing for many highly sensitive, or for highly sensitive people in general, is there is this real love of deep depth and connection, and maybe that's some of what you're talking about.
Yeah, for sure. It's obvious that it's very important to you, and therefore it's very important to me as well. But like if you were less inclined towards that sort of connection, who knows how I would respond. It's sort of it just creates this sort of like intention that sort of like brings our vibration higher. Yeah, and I think just to sort of add one more thing to this is that, you're very tuned in and perceptive of like sort of everybody's general state. I can come home from after sort of like a, whatever kind of day of work I had, and you can sort of immediately tune in and be like, oh, Will's in this sort of state, and then sort of respond appropriately, come over and like give me a hug and be like, hey, is everything all right? Same thing with the boys. You guys have like this perfect knack for sort of responding to whatever chaotic temperament or loving temperament that they're in. Obviously they sort of are in more extremes, but you're just really tuned into sort of the way people are and how they're feeling.
So what do you think? I know that you might not actually like be able to fully decipher this yet, or just in general, but do you think there's a difference, or like, what is it? Like, how do you think my what I would call like I'm a self-coached, highly sensitive person. And maybe another way of putting that is just how do you think my skills around relationship and sort of honoring my sensitivity, how do you think that's helped our relationship?
Well, I think that's kind of like the icing on the cake. You know, I mean, the cake is that you're HSP, and then the icing is the fact that you're a coach and, have all these amazing tools to sort of put, this wide array of practices and whatnot into play in our lives and our relationship. It's not like you just like read a book on HSPs and you're like, oh, this is this cool thing I learned about, it's like you fully understand it, but then you also have all these tools to, help yourself and then help me and therefore help us, which helps our family. And, I find that, it's like gotten to the point where, even I'm out there like talking with my coworkers, I'm like, you know what? That's just a thought. That thing that you're responding to is completely neutral. It has no, even just today, it was hilarious. And I'm just like, too much into the coaching world. It's like, which is good. I think, ultimately I find it incredibly beneficial because there's such wisdom and power in the tools that you have and share.
Yeah.
So, I think the other thing too is that, I've always sort of considered myself, a good communicator and like I really thought, you're like, oh yeah, I've got this down. But I think the error that I realized was that just because I'm very perceptive of my thought and, quick-witted and that I can enunciate things quickly does not necessarily mean it makes me a good communicator. There's so much more, as a musician, I always say that like half of music is the silence and the other half is the sound, so in terms of communicating, especially with you, when you say something, I don't have to just like immediately sort of like respond instantly with the first thought that comes to my mind, like I'll take a breath, think about it, so I think as far as like, as I was saying, those tools that you have, those have been incredibly powerful.
So you thought of yourself as a good communicator before meeting me.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. But I think ultimately is what I was trying to say is that you, with your coaching skills and the tools that you have just like made me realize how much I didn't know about communication. And it wasn't just like, blurting out the first thing that comes to mind and talking a lot, which I know I can do.
Yeah. You're a good talker. So, I guess kind of along those lines, I know that you and I talk about our marriage. We coin our marriage an amazing marriage. And I think of that like, I like to sort of define that. And the way that we define that is that it's like it's a real marriage. It's a human marriage. But like love is the thing that is like what's a good metaphor? Like the floorboards in the house and the walls in the house. Like it's the house. Love is the house, right? That we live in.
Yeah.
And, we still have our human quirks and little flaws. I mean, we could call them flaws, although that's just a thought, as you might say.
Nuances.
And, we have our moments of conflict or where one or the other or both of us are irritated with each other. But, I think we get to know each other better through those difficult moments, and we get closer and closer over time is how I feel. And, one way to put that is I think we use our humanness and our imperfections for closeness, right? And so that's kind of my definition of an amazing marriage. And of course, for us, like, I guess an extension of that is there's a lot of fun and joy and laughter and silliness and passion too, and affection, like all of it, right? But we still have this human piece and those human, I don't know why I call it that, human. It's just like the harder aspects that come along with relationships. So anyway, that's like part and parcel of this amazing marriage. And we let those things bring us closer, and we continue to get more and more connected over time. But so anyway, that's my definition of an amazing marriage. But in one of the ways I think that we make this the case for us, the way that we've allowed for this to happen, is that we have been very intentional in a lot of ways in our relationship. And you keep talking about the tools, right?
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking, like, in some ways I use those tools, or we've started to use those tools in order to create what we want in our marriage, right? And we've gotten very deliberate about all sorts of things, right? We are very deliberate about all sorts of things, instead of just kind of like hoping for it to be good all the time.
Oh yeah, totally.
So, do you want to share some ways that you think work well for us, to be, ways that things that we do intentionally that actually really serve our relationship?
Yeah, man, there's so much actually. I mean, I think, whether it's, just in terms of making time to just talk.
Yeah.
And make sure we really connect, and sort of like, even on a small, like, level of just like, for instance, after putting our son down and before we go do our own thing at night, just like check in, even if it's just for 5 minutes or something, there's like that level of intention that really helps and goes a long way. But then of course the sort of larger stuff, like we just got back from a weekend away together. We prioritize and make time for like, okay, we need time for just the two of us for like, even if it's just 36 hours, it's like a huge difference.
Yeah.
So, haven't gotten the like month away yet or 2 weeks away someday.
Yeah, it's definitely out there waiting for us.
So I mean, and anywhere in between and all that stuff, in terms of this, like making sure that we spend time together on the weekends, doing stuff together. And then we have a one night a week for sure at a minimum that, we always know that we're going to be like together. It's not just like, to the whims of like the day of like, however we're feeling, like, maybe so, maybe not.
Well, it's a one day in the middle of the week, and then we usually spend time on the weekends.
Yeah.
Definitely at least one night on the weekends, if not multiple.
Yeah.
Evenings.
So at a minimum 2 nights a week where we know like, okay, our intention is fully to like be present with each other, and whether it's just like, chill out and like meditate and, have a talk and then go to bed early.
Yes, he meditates. He had never even done yoga before we met. That's even part of it, is we get up together in the morning and we do yoga and we alternate some things, but we spend early morning.
Yeah, every morning together.
This was not necessarily just like, oh, let's do that, and we started doing it. It took some effort and some planning.
But yeah, it's been over a year now. So yeah, as I said, there's just a whole slew of different intentional elements that I think just help us as a couple in our relationship, but also just in terms of the overall like family dynamics too. That the boys know, like, Wednesday nights, they're off meditating, so it really helps for sure. Yeah.
And that's, I it's a thing I recommend, is to actually create some schedule, at least a schedule that's flexible, but with some parameters. So I think the other piece that I want to mention is it's not just all about spending time together. It's about spending time alone and apart, right? Like, and we're pretty intentional about that too. Like, there are certain evenings where you go do your thing, and those, like your creative night, like your music night. And I love my nights when I'm alone, like when I get to have some space to myself, like those are so essential, especially for highly sensitive people, right? So that's the intentional piece about how we spend our time and create our schedule and our weekly, daily lives together. But then there's intentional communication, right? Like you were talking about with listening, like you've intentionally learned how to be a better listener, and that's made such a big difference.
Yeah, like I didn't, and was never like officially taught, like this is how you listen, and like just the techniques of, like repeat back, somebody says something, things like that, So there's so many little elements that are just hugely helpful that you've taught me and shown me through example.
And around communication and schedule, both of those together, is we oftentimes, we used to be a little bit more religious about this. I'm like realizing we don't do it as much lately, but it's kind of waxes and wanes, but where we have check-in evenings. So part of our Wednesday night is often where we really check in, like, how are you? Like, how was your week? Like, has anything come up? Like, is there anything hard between us that you want to address? And we also, again, we used to be better at this. We should get one back on the calendar about our stuff talks where we like just focus on like things that need to get done and get them figured out. And when we'll do them, helps kind of take them out of the regular daily conversation and lets our normal conversation just be more not geared towards the like to-do list.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's very much like, and also kind of a more rapid fire way too. It's like, okay, we're going to have 10 minutes or whatever, and just like, talk about, okay, here's the like things we need to do for like the week. So it obviously, I mean, any of you with families knows that, that just like the kids and work and all that can just spill over to everything all the time if you're not aware of it. So trying to, I mean, a little bit of it, I guess, is compartmentalization. It's like now we're together.
Yeah.
Intentional, loving time. And then, then there's a different time for like, okay, now we're like together, just like talking about what we're doing for the week, the month, the 6 months.
Yeah. Yeah. Because, partnerships, romantic partnerships are so multifaceted, right? Like when we live or have a life with someone, there's all the like rote stuff, the stuff that has to get done. Like when you own a home together or you rent a home together, like there's still chores around the house. There's always all that stuff. There's plans and bills and all of that. And some of that stuff wants to get talked about. Like it's important to talk about some of that stuff and make sure it's all getting done or divided up, right? And then there's bigger stuff that comes along with that. And then there's, of course, like the other aspects of these kinds of relationships are like the loving connection is like the fun that you can have together. Like there's so many, we could compartmentalize them all. And if we can nourish all those different aspects of what, matters to us as a couple, of what like is part, like what we want to be part of our life, then I'm just thinking about this in a kind of new way that I haven't before, but I think we do a really good job of that, right? Like we do cultivate fun together, right? Yeah. We go out and we've been cross-country skiing a lot together, and that's been fun. It's not like so romantic, right? But it's super fun. And then other times we have weekly date night, and that is much more romantic. We intentionally make it like candlelit, and we don't go to restaurants these days. We just hang out at home. Shops. Now it's just like dinner after the little one's down with candles. But it's nice and it's special and it is romantic.
Yeah.
So there are so many other ways that we are very intentional in our relationship, and we could do many podcast episodes on all of that. But let's bring it back to sensitivity again.
Okay.
So what do you think? I mean, I think this can be a challenge in some people's relationship, especially before people know they're highly sensitive, right? But then as they discover that they're highly sensitive people, and they start to understand that, I think sometimes what comes up is like, how can my partner understand that too? Like how can he be on board and support me in this, right? So I'm curious for you, like what helps you understand and really be able to honor my sensitivity, because you've come a long way in that since we first met.
Yeah, I mean, before meeting you, I didn't even know that it existed. I think the main thing is just you sharing with me, the wealth of information and the knowledge that you have about it. I feel like you're constantly sort of just being like, ooh, like I just read this new thing, or I heard this new thing, and even just like directing me to sort of like, resources, whether it's people or like, even like, I think it's, it's the highly sensitive parenting podcast or something. But yeah, exactly. It's just like, you sharing with me all that you know, and just like, engaging in conversations and sort of like helping me sort of realize, where you're coming from, has been incredibly helpful. And at this point, I feel like, I've become, certain aspects have become a little bit more sort of second nature to me, to sort of like see like, ooh, this is, a particular moment that, for instance, like, if we're having some sort of minor disagreement or something, I can sort of sense, sort of when you're, responding in a highly sensitive way that, I'm like, okay, I need to respond this way, like give you the space and like, not jump in with all my sort of like classic man of like, oh, I'm going to fix your problem right now. But just to let you sort of like feel whatever it is you're feeling. And
you've started to like, when I sometimes when we've had some sort of little thing or I'm just having an emotion, like actually the other night I was sitting by the refrigerator and I was crying, and he was like, he looked over, because I was actually just listening to a song and I burst into tears. And he looked over at me and he's like, you okay? And instead of, he's gotten to know me so well that like when I'm in a very, when I'm emotional like that, like when my feelings are super strong, giving me a little space is actually the best. So I can just feel my feelings and then I'll be able to come back. Hey, there's our kitty. Hi, bud. Then I'll be able to, share what's going on with me, right? But it doesn't necessarily help. I mean, I really recognize that the other night, like how good you are at that these days. Of you've seen that it doesn't work so well for me. Like I might even shrug you off if you come over and try to touch me when I'm like like when my emotions are so strong. And some of you will really, really get this. It's like there's just like so much informational load there with all those feelings that even a gentle touch is too much. So that's one way that I see you. You've really become much more adept at honoring my sensitivity, and then just an example of
just when you need like the space, or I even get a better sense of when to come over and sort of give you a hug and what. Yeah, and I think in order to get to that space, where I know how to sort of respond to you, the key is that, and I think I've found this, is that you understanding yourself and what you need and, how you operate, has really shown me a way to just respond appropriately. If you didn't know what you know, then I would sort of not be able to sort of like give you your space, or I would particularly take things, more personally, and respond inappropriately. But yeah, I mean, it really comes down to that communication, like if you didn't communicate to me, like I would be sort of like lost in the woods of like, well, what's going on here? What did I do wrong? Or like, why is she taking it? So
you'd be taking it more personally.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it really comes down to you understanding yourself and then communicating that to me so that I know, okay, I get it now. Like, this is what I need to do.
And you've been really good at that. And I just so appreciate you, being open to, I mean, I don't think it would have worked out very well for you if you didn't learn how to honor my sensitivity.
Yeah.
Because then I would just be a cranky pants all the time. And that's no fun for you.
No, you wouldn't.
I think really what I'm talking about is one of the things that I see that you've learned. I mean, because I have boundaries and I ask you for these things, and you see the results when I don't get these things, which is what I'm trying to talk about, is space and time for myself and sleep. Those are like the keys to staying centered.
Yeah.
Right. And not being completely, off kilter.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see the value in that for sure.
Of course you do. Yeah. And I just appreciate how you've changed your bedtime, because Or you're quiet when you come in late, knowing that I need my sleep. And so, I love it.
Yeah.
And I thank you for it.
You're welcome.
So kind of along those same lines, one thing I hear from women is concern that their differences with their partner make them potentially not right for each other or like incompatible. Do you think you and I are like two peas in a pod and that's why we're so happy together? Or do we have lots of differences? It's kind of a leading question.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's tempting for me to want to like wax philosophical on this, but I mean, I think obviously we are peas in a pod, but we also are different, It's like, yes, you're a pea, I am a pea. We're in this pod together, but we're not the same pea, And that would not be good, Like differences are healthy and positive. I mean, I think that the key is to be able to sort of, always have that and cultivate that mutual attraction and all those elements of like, hey, you're a pea, I'm a pea. That's great.
Cultivating mutual attraction. I'm just going to pull that out there for a second because that's one of those areas that we're very intentional.
Yeah, exactly. And we work hard and we practice, I mean, it's like, just as like with my music, I don't just like sit around and think that I'm going to get better at it by,
sitting around.
Yeah, exactly. I practice. I make time. So I think, back to us as, peas in the pod, with differences that, we celebrate our differences and we understand and we respect our differences. And, we have enough of the mutual, like, hey, you're a pea, I'm a pea, as sort of our foundation and a reminder that, like we're in this together and like,
but we cultivate.
Yeah,
exactly. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. We work hard.
We work at it. Like,
it's very intentional. And, I think, there's some differences that we celebrate, just in terms of our unique personalities and characters and whatnot. And then there's certain aspects that we're sort of like always sort of striving to sort of bring more in alignment together. I think obviously like my understanding and of HSPs, for instance, is one thing that's a perfect example of like, that's a difference that, we started with, which, there was a larger chasm, and then it's getting smaller the more, for instance, you're understanding yourself and the more I sort of understand of you and HSPs in general, the closer that difference or the less of a difference it becomes, we have a mutual understanding of like.
It just sounds like we learn how to, like, we communicate. I mean, that's one of the key things is we communicate around our differences and we learn to work with them in all sorts of different ways. Like, this isn't an episode to get into exactly what those ways are, like how we navigate those things, but.
Yeah, next episode.
Right. So it's not like the fact of differences that's a problem.
Difference is good.
Yeah. Sometimes, differences aren't just sometimes good. They're like oftentimes like where so much of the richness and so much of the growth. I mean, one of the things I truly believe about marriage and committed relationships is that they're here for our growth. They help us grow. They're not just for helping us be happy people, right? They're here to help us evolve as human beings and evolve together. And some of the most rich, like potent, delicious work we'll ever do in our lives will be because of the differences that we bring to the relationship.
Yeah.
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 I mean, that's been true for me in our marriage.
Yeah, totally.
You think so?
Yeah, I think so, for sure.
So it's not that differences are a problem. It's just in the approach and like how we address them, right?
Yeah, and I would imagine that for the majority of your listeners and their partners, that there's enough of that sort of like mutual interest. Obviously, they wouldn't be with them. That it's not like two vastly different, completely unintelligible beings coming together. So
yeah, if they got together in the beginning,
yeah, exactly. So
there was something there. There was like, at least two peas in a pod enoughness.
Yeah, for sure, exactly. So
I like that. So do you have any final tip for my listeners that you think might be helpful for them?
Yeah, I would say just remember you're on the same team and that your partner wants to do the right thing. And so just approach any kind of interaction with sort of patience and with patience.
Approach it with impatience. Exactly. That's the ticket.
Yeah. Just patience and compassion. And just really share your experience and your understanding. That's going to be super helpful so that he understands, or she, that you're on the same team and that you're both in this together, and that it's not, any kind of competition, or that, just to make sure that there's no misunderstandings.
There will be misunderstandings.
Yeah, there will be, but I mean, the patient and the compassionate communication is key. I mean, I think that would be sort of my final thought.
I love it. Of course. It's lovely.
I mean, I think that's what my experience is that, you've been incredibly patient with me. You've shared so much with me. And you're very compassionate about, any of my faults, and sort of not.
I love just knowing, I think one of the ways that works for me is just, I believe deeply that we're in this together. We're learning together. Mm-hmm. And it's okay if it's a little messy sometimes.
Yeah.
That's totally worth it. Isn't it, love?
Oh, yeah, totally.
Well, thank you so much for spending this evening with me in this way.
Yeah, for sure. I'll look forward to the next episode when we do this again.
Yeah, so fun.
Yeah.
I would actually love to hear if listeners actually have any questions that we could maybe do another episode and actually address specific questions. This one was just a little let's just talk.
Yeah. Ask Will.
Yeah, right. Ask Will and Hannah. So if anyone's listening to this and has a question, feel free to email me, and maybe we'll pull another episode together in the future and answer some questions. You can email me at hannah@lifeisworthloving.com. But anyway, thanks for being here, my love.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll see you in a few.
Okay.
And thank you to all of you listening, and be oh so well until next time.